welcome back to another episode of the Mindsets podcast. Today, I'm joined by a new friend. I've made a Hyrox friend, but before we get into the introduction for today, I'll let Charlie introduce himself in a moment. However, I'm still your podcast host. So my name's Angus Cook. I've got a bit of a background in doing interesting interviews now with many, many different athletes from many, many different backgrounds who have come on to share their story, give a bit of wisdom on their own path and journey. And we've been fortunate enough to listen to those stories and learn as we've gone. So let me hand over now to Charlie, who's going to give you a bit of a background as to who he is and what his sport is. And then we'll discover about some of the things that have happened along the way. Charlie, do take over.
Well, so my name's Charlie Botterill, and I've got 3 middle names, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I won't bother explaining them. I'm 22 years old, and I'm currently a Hyrox athlete, so I'm looking to sort of become the best I can. And in that, I've previously been a professional cyclist and an academy footballer along the way. But yeah, Hyrox is where, or Hyrox, not Hyrox, is where I apply my trade now.
Amazing. So, as I said, I've made a Hyrox friend. I've made a good Hyrox friend because you're already pretty good at it, which is where I think people find a lot of value in today, learning some things from you. But, ladies and gentlemen, we have a new section to the podcast. By popular demand, I believe it was 96% of people voted that we should bring in a show and tell portion to the show. Now, what does show and tell mean? Some people are a bit confused by it. Well, when I was at school, once a week, a few people would be selected to bring something in from home, show the class, and tell everyone about it. So I pitched this idea to Charlie, and you turned up today with a thing. Do you want to take over and give us your show and tell?
I can take over, and I was one of said 96% of people who voted in favour of this. And when I voted, I knew exactly what I was going to go with. The only issue is, Russell, the culprit for this show and tell, I've left him at my mum's house because I was moving out of university, and I moved half my stuff home, and I've left him on the desk. So we have no Russell, who was the main contender for show and tell, but we have a Christmas edition of Russell.
See, I thought for a moment we were going to go empty-handed on the first show and tell. However, Christmas Russell has come through.
This is Russell, and he is a Brussels. Russell the Russell.
So just quickly, for anyone that's listening, this is a fantastic opportunity to stop listening, go over to the YouTube, watch it on YouTube. But for those that are unable to do so, you currently have a Christmas decoration that looks like a Brussels sprout.
Yeah, so Russell, the original, I'm sure we can insert some photos somewhere possibly. He's a little stress ball. I didn't really necessarily get him for stress. It's just I love Brussels sprouts on a Christmas dinner. And Mum saw him in a shop and was like, Charlie, you've got Russell. And now whenever I go to any race, anywhere, I'll have not necessarily Christmas Russell, but normal Russell will be in my bag. So Russell comes with me to every race, and it's kind of become just a bit of a thing now.
Is he a good luck charm, or is it just a thing generally?
Well, I don't really believe in luck, but if I were to believe in luck, he would be my good luck charm, put it that way. And
Okay.
it's just funny.
Have you ever actually taken Russell out on a race with you, or does he stay in the bag, keeping everything safe?
He stays in the bag. People have met Russell like at races, and when I did my ultra marathon around London, I took Russell with me. So I've got a few photos of Russell running around London. Well, Russell in my hand as I run around London, but it's just become a bit of a funny thing with me and some of my friends and my parents, really.
I rate that so much. Well, there we go. That's the first show and tell. I enjoyed that one. Now, that's given us a bit more context as to, you're not just a Hyrox athlete that has just started Hyrox in the last couple of weeks. You've actually been doing this for some time, and you've done some interesting journeys. Oh, look at that. We're having Russell hung up on the podcast set plant. Amazing. So let's spin it back then. Now, Hyrox is a bit of an interesting race. For those that don't know, it's a combination of running and some stations of different fitness movements. So you've got things like sled pushes there, you've got rowing machines or ergs, you've got burpees, all of this horrible, horrible stuff that you can combine into one event. It is, however, an endurance event. Now, if I was going to design an endurance athlete, and I'm going to go from a genetic standpoint, I'd probably take, one parent that's got maybe a history of doing marathons or long distance running to get that one way, and then maybe take another parent that's got some sort of military background to do all of these different movements and be powerful through them. And that's what I would do. Have you got any of that in your background?
It's funny you say that. My mum has run 5 marathons. She's done many like peaks challenges. So the 4 peaks, which is the 4 highest peaks in the UK, in 48 hours, which was tough, but she enjoyed that. And then, so yeah, she's done 5 marathons as well, including New York, which she absolutely loved. And then my dad is ex-parachute regiment. So he spent, I can't even remember how many years he spent doing that, but he's jumped out of a plane a lot more times than I have, put it that way. So yeah, that's the background of my 2 parents. And then my stepdad is also a very keen cyclist. So he's gone all over the place in terms of that. I know there's no genetic component there.
Well, I mean, there's still the environmental component.
The environment of being around him as well. So yeah.
Now, sport seemed to get going pretty early on with you in terms of football. Was that your first love?
In sport, yes. Well, just in general, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started football when I was 4 or 5 years old, probably. We signed up for my local team, Crowmarsh Football Club, my local village, and I played for them for under 5s up until under 15s, under 16s.
Oh, so a good long stint there.
Yeah, so my whole youth career was playing for them.
And did you start in goal, or did you start outfield and then kind of just work your way backwards into net, basically?
Well, in sort of as a really young kid, you kind of just start and you're kicking the ball around, and then people take it in turns to go in goal and whatnot. And then my dad, when he was younger, he played as a goalkeeper. I'm not sure if it was semi-professionally. It might have been just below that. So he was always keen for me to become a goalkeeper. And eventually that rubbed off and I became a goalkeeper. And I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I was quite good. Because obviously he'd trained me outside of football because he wanted to see me do well. And yeah, that's how I kind of became a goalkeeper from my dad.
So different to my story. So like I started playing in goal. Well, I didn't start playing in goal, a bit like you, just turned up and played football with my mates at training, ended up going in goal more often than the others. And then I actually found that I really enjoyed it, because if I kicked a ball out of my hand at that age, I could pretty much kick it down to the other goal. And so it was just immediately, it was so satisfying. Like as soon as the ball is in my hands, great, we're now on the attack, because like I could kick it that far. The irony of that is, as I got older playing football, kicking off the ground, something I just could not do. So even when we're talking into like teenagehood, I was asking my mates to take the kick off the floor, because I could still do the kick out of hand and get it a long way, but like I just lost the ability. I don't think I ever had the ability to kick it off the ground. Mm-hmm. So my goalkeeping career was never really going to go anywhere as a result of that. However, you got scouted.
Yeah, so I got scouted by Reading in under 8s, I want to say, under 7s or under 8s. And then I spent a couple of years on their books, sort of going to Reading, training, playing, coming home, and then doing it alongside my time with Crowmarsh as well, just because at that age, you don't really need the exclusiveness of an academy. And that's kind of meant for later years, like 14, 15. So yeah, I spent a couple of years playing golf for them, which was a good experience. Good to be in such a professional environment from a young age, because I think that's helped me even today, because it's made me sort of understand if you want to do well, you have to surround yourself in the right people and be coached by people better than you. So I think it's, certainly benefited me, that experience.
Awesome. What you then did, though, was a bit of Fernando Torres. So I don't know if many people know this. Fernando Torres, the once great Liverpool striker, actually used to be a goalkeeper when he was younger in academy. And then he decided that I'm bored of stopping other people scoring. Maybe I should just go and score them myself. You did that. What kind of led that, and how did it go?
I just didn't enjoy it anymore, really, if I'm honest. And I think if you don't enjoy something, you should change. Otherwise, it will just stay the same. And looking back, I think I probably should have stuck as a goalkeeper, because I could be earning quite a bit of money based on some of the salaries I've been seeing thrown around nowadays. But I was like, I don't enjoy it anymore. I want to try something new. I'll go outfield. I did that, and I hit the ground running, and it just came naturally, really.
Okay. And how did it go once you got going? Obviously, you said hit the ground running. You were quite highly ranked as a striker for a little while, weren't you?
Yeah. So, with my local team, we won the county cup, and I was striker, and I was the league's top goal scorer, or like the league system's top goal scorer, as well as the club's top goal scorer. And I got scouted by Brentford, Oxford United. Unfortunately, Brentford didn't work out, mainly due to the fact that I was living just south of Oxford, and Brentford's a bit of a trek for my parents to make 3 times a week, not knowing whether or not I'd succeed or not. But yeah, so I spent a few years playing at striker. And one of my favourite moments was so I used to be an 800 metre runner in school as well. So I think I still hold my school's 800 metre record. And I had a county meet during the summer, and we had a tournament at the same time. So I did this 800 meet, and the moment I crossed the finish line, I came like 5th or something. I sprinted to the car. My dad was waiting in the car, and we went straight to this football tournament. And the team I was playing for at the time, like in this tournament team, we hadn't done too well in the group stage. And it was the last game, and I vividly remember it. I'm sprinting across this, like all these different pitches to get to our pitch at the end. And we needed to win that last game. It was in Didcot, if anyone watching this is from
Shout out Didcot fans.
And I got subbed on with about 2 minutes to go when we had a corner in this tournament. And I run on, the corner gets taken, and almost as I'm running on from it, I hit it on the volley. And it's the sweetest strike I've ever made in my entire life. And we qualified and won that tournament after that. And it was one of the coolest moments I've ever had.
Do you know what?
Tangent, but
I think one of my favorite things about sport in general, especially as athletes, is if you look at most sports, there is a pivotal moment that you will never forget. Something. What I love is that happened like relatively a bit later on in your career, basically as a footballer. Sadly, I peaked really early in my football career. You know how I mentioned as I got going in football, I ended up moving towards more goalkeeping.
Yeah.
My first ever game was for Horsley Football Club down south. I can't remember who we were playing. It was just a small pitch. I came on centre midfield. I didn't know what I was doing really, because it was a new team. I was on the halfway line while my team was taking a corner, and their goalkeeper punched it out, and I hit it on the volley, and it went top corner, and we won the game. And I can still see that like it happened yesterday. And that's what I mean. Like I peaked because I never did anything better in the sport ever again. That was the moment for me. Now, you were doing incredibly well, scoring screamers like that. And then, do you know what? A lot of people have it taking the piss out of when they talk about the fact that they're not a pro footballer anymore.
Yeah.
There is a classic one-liner that's used all over Twitter. And in fact, our last guest, Cairo, also had a very similar sort of story. But you didn't go pro because of your knee.
Yeah.
Amongst other things.
Yeah, so we had a cup semi-final, I want to say. I think it was a semi-final. It might have been the quarters. We were 4-5-0 up, like in control of the game with literally minutes left, like 3-4 minutes. And I vividly remember this as well, purely because it was quite not a nice thing to remember. But I was on the left wing. Ball gets played down the line. I twisted to obviously chase it, and our striker had been sort of up against their centre-back the whole game, and he'd been running rings around the centre-back, and you could see the centre-back was visibly a bit like, are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, 100%.
Pissed off.
Oh,
He'd been run rings around all game, and he came flying in, no intention of winning the ball, into my left knee, which was twisted at the time, and it didn't end too well for me, put it that way. I tore my meniscus, I separated my articular cartilage, I fractured my femur, and I strained my MCL, which on its own isn't a bad injury, but it's just another one to add to the list of that one moment. So that really put a curtain on my football career. I came back from the injury, but the same thing happened again just because my knee wasn't strong enough. So literally like in a click of a finger, that was it. Like 8 years or 10 years even, just gone.
and did you go straight into surgery from that injury, or did you have to like heal up a bit and then?
So it was a bit of a wait with the NHS, just because that, like, it's paid with taxes, and it's like we can't really complain, and there was a bit of a wait with the NHS, and then eventually we managed to get it through private insurance through my stepdad's work. So that was probably 3 months after the incident, and then it took plus or minus a couple months, a year to get back playing after that.
Now, I think one thing that people listening will fully understand is based on your family's background in sport, plus the way that you grew up and how you were clearly playing a lot of sport and doing a lot of training as well. To have it disappear overnight, or literally, well, not overnight, but over the course of 5 minutes, is wild. How old were you when that happened?
First one was 2015. So I would have been 14 years old at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, 14.
And then it happened again
2017.
So in that period of time, I imagine that you've kind of gone through the lows of being injured, then you've gone through the kind of redevelopment, looking forward to getting back, and then it happening again. There's just a lot of like uncertainty in that whole period of time. And around that period of time anyway, regardless of sport, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, especially if you are good at sport, you might have had that as, that's what I'm going to do with my life. But you're probably having to figure this all out again. What were the noticeable things you saw change about yourself in that time?
Well, it was kind of, at the time I was playing football. Well, I was coaching my sister's football team on a Monday night. I was training on a Tuesday, training on a Wednesday, training on a Thursday. The Wednesday one was on my own just because I enjoyed it. Coaching an under-6s team on the Friday, playing on Saturday, playing on Sunday. So every day essentially revolved around school and then football. And then when you've got literally 24 hours left in a day extra just from not doing anything, and you're just sat there in your own head basically because you can't really do much when you do that, it kind of just, it made me appreciate movement a lot more. Being unable to move, being unable to play sport, it kind of makes you appreciate that, enjoy it while you've got it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think that's where, as athletes, where you clearly had a bit of a routine there, right? Athletes thrive off routine, whether they say they thrive off it and enjoy it. To be a high level athlete, you need to have a form of routine. I think that's well understood. The problem being is when you lose routine, quite often you're trying to take control of things in whatever way you can, which is something that I'm aware you've discussed before, but do you want to give a bit of a sort of gravity as to what that looked like in your instance?
Well, so after my second knee injury, I kind of had to, the surgeon basically said, you could go back to playing football, but you'll just injure yourself again, and then we'll stitch everything up. You'll injure yourself again, kind of thing. And I was like, there's no point in just going through this once every 2 years. It just doesn't really make sense. And it was at kind of a point where I was doing my GCSEs, and looking back, GCSEs weren't very stressful, but at the time they were everything, and they were like massively stressful. And when, like, at the time, I felt like my life was completely out of control. And from the first injury, I'm flip-flopping back and forth here, I developed quite severe depression in that point, just because you've gone from playing with your mates 5 days a week, going all these places, enjoying football, to sitting at home doing nothing. I'd kept that sort of depression since then. I'm a lot better now, obviously. And when you've got no control really over like what you can do in sport, and then you've got the stress of your exams and whatnot, you try to look for things in your life that you can control. And one of the things that I could control, and that anyone can control, is what they eat. And from my depression, I developed anorexia. So that stuck with me. In its most severe form, it stuck with me for about 9 months. And then this was in 2018. So from its worst, it was probably June 2018 to January, February 2019. And then it kind of didn't really leave me fully until university in September 2021. So give or take 3 years.
I think there's not a lot of understanding around eating disorders generally. And we've been fortunate enough to have Emily Mary come on to the podcast in the past to discuss her interaction with bulimia. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I find particularly interesting is, statistically speaking, and don't worry, I will reference where I've got all this information from for anyone that's wondering, 1 in 4 people that suffer from an eating disorder are men. So it's definitely outbalanced more so in females. Mm-hmm. But also 10% of people that suffer from eating disorders suffer with anorexia. So it's actually one of the smaller, it's not one of the smaller, but in comparison to other things like
it's less common. Yeah.
Binge eating, it's less common. So put those two things together, your case is actually quite rare. If you look at it in that sense, statistically. Now, one of the things that I find particularly interesting, given that in my own family, there is a history of anorexia as well. I'm interested to know from your perspective, you appreciate now that you had anorexia and that you were controlling what you were putting into your body. But at the time, were you fully aware of what you were doing and what it was? Or was it kind of just this habit that grew?
It's a very good question, and it's a weird way that your head works. Like, it's very difficult to explain unless you have it. It's kind of like, so there's a quote that I love from Nick Bare. People might know who Nick Bare is. People might not know who Nick Bare is. If you don't know, I recommend you go and check him out. But he says you should become all in, but not all consumed. And I use that going forward now, because I used it to control. I used what I ate to control. Well, I controlled what I ate because it was the only thing I could control, and it kind of made me all consumed in it. And I was trying to control every single aspect because I was like, I've got something I can control here. And my case is very rare compared to what other people go through. So a lot of people would go for it because the way they perceive their body, and mine was more just I could control something in my life, and it kind of just spiraled from there. But it's something very difficult to explain, and you only really understand it if you've been through something similar. Not necessarily anorexia, but if you've, like, people who have had drug addictions almost, it's kind of, you found something that takes your mind somewhere else or gives you control or whatever. And that's probably a horrible reference.
No, I think you are right though. Like in both cases, it's what the standard person would look at and say that is not a normal way of thinking. and they come from the same place. And in terms of getting out of them, they actually do have similar treatments in effect. Again, through personal experience that's happened within my family, hospitals, a hospital case was needed. I don't know if that was the same as in yours.
Yeah, so I had daily visits to the hospital. I never stayed over in a hospital, but it got to points where I was close to having to stay over in hospitals.
Yeah, and that's a pretty scary position. And I think, especially for a wider family, I can imagine that your sort of parents were very, very worried about the whole thing and wanting, to be there for you, but also try and give a solution, which is also very difficult because sometimes you can't provide the solution. It does need to kind of be given time. And as you have seen in terms of giving us that time scale of it going on for, more than 3 years, it's not a quick fix. It's not something that can be a quick fix. Now, in that time though, you did actually progress away from football into other sport. One thing that I'm actually quite interested by, you've mentioned that your stepdad was interested in has got a good background in cycling, not just interested in it. But when you were doing rehab for your knee, I imagine you were doing some things like swimming and cycling as well.
Yeah.
Did that spark your interest in maybe moving towards cycling, or was it a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, so it was a combination of things, but I started cycling just as rehab. And then we went out on a few rides as a family and as groups and whatnot. And people were like, oh, you're quite good at this. And just because I've got, like I said, I had the 800 meter background and whatnot. So I was quite powerful as a cyclist, and people were saying, oh, you're quite good. And I was like, I enjoy it. And then I signed up for my first race. I did horrendous in my first race because I'd never raced a bike. And then I did my second one and I came third in the fourth cat race, which, if anyone knows cycling, fourth cat's kind of like the beginner. But I was the youngest there by a country mile. And as a junior cyclist, which is what you are when you're under 18, you have restricted gears. So you can only actually pedal up to a certain speed on a flat road because you just run out of gears, which makes it really difficult as a junior because when you sprint at the end, you physically can't spin your legs any faster. Yeah. So you have to be you have to get a bit of racecraft. But so after that, I found cycling and I was like, I'm good at this. I can pursue it and try and make something out of this instead.
So how did you end up in France?
So over 2019, I kind of came out of the bad part of the eating disorder. It didn't fully leave me, so I still stayed very skinny. And as a cyclist, you're burning a lot anyway, so you're going to stay sort of leaner and smaller. And I got better and better as an actual cyclist ability-wise over 2019. And then I went into 2020 and I was like, right, I've got to really kind of do as good as I can here. And then COVID happened. And then I was in sixth form at the time. And I never did my A-levels because COVID kind of put an end to that. And then I was in summer, everywhere was locked down. You couldn't do anything. And I was like, well, I may as well just train and see if I can get really good at this. And then I didn't have any race results, but I had some incredible power numbers. So cycling, you've got a power meter on your bike, basically measures the power you put out. The more power you put out, the better you are, compared to your weight and whatnot. And I do some really good numbers. And then I sent my details off to some domestic teams in France. And the cycling scene in France is sort of comparative to the football scene in England. Cycling is there.
Well, they got the Tour de France and everything, yeah.
So they're on par with each other. There's so many races every weekend all across France, and people come out and watch them. And then I didn't really hear back from any of them. So I was about to go to uni in September, literally probably 2 weeks away. And then one email's back, we'd like to sign you. And then I was like, Mum, I'm moving to France. And then I had to be in France before December 31st because this was when Brexit was going on as well. So I got the contract, and then it was kind of spend Christmas with my family and then move out there. And that's how it kind of all unraveled.
So what's it like moving out to a foreign, I mean, it's close, I guess, but it's still a foreign country. I did a similar thing when well, not for the same reason, but I went out to France. I was there for like 6 months. It was kind of my first time of living away from family and friends and everything like that. How did you find that?
It was difficult because there was a lockdown every other week. I had 2 guys that I was living with, one English guy, also called Charlie, and an Estonian guy called Kirill. And they're great flatmates, and they kind of taught me the ropes and helped me in all aspects. But they'd go home quite frequently because they'd lived in France the year before, and the way that the French permits have kind of worked, like once you've been there for a year, you can kind of go in and out of the country as you please. But because I'd only just moved there, it's like, it's Brexit, it's COVID. So if you leave, you can't really come back in. So I didn't really have an option to go home. So when they went home, I was in a flat on my own for like weeks at a time. And the only interaction I'd really have was with the supermarket assistant when I went to the shops. So it was difficult. And in the end, that was kind of what meant I came home early, and I just pulled the pin. I was like, I don't enjoy this anymore. And I've got other things I want to pursue. So I should just pull the pin and move home. And that's what I did in June 2021.
So June 2021, when did you then discover the sport of Hyrox?
So I came to university in September 2021. And then at that point, I was kind of like, I'm fed up with what my life has been for the past 3 years. Like, sorry. I was fed up with, like, I was just skinny, didn't really have a social life. Looked at myself in the mirror and was like, you just, like, looks aren't everything. But I was like, no girl is going to fall in love with me the way I look right now. And I was just like, I need to find something new. And I saw a video of Hyrox very early on, probably October 2021. And I was like, that looks cool. I want to be good at that. But I knew that from all my sporting background, I'm not going to be good at that unless I put in like a year of work. So I was like, when the next one comes to London, which was exhaled November 2022, I'll do that one. So I kind of put on a ridiculous amount of weight. I don't really condone it, but I kind of knew that if you put on a load of weight, it's more conducive to building muscle. And I had no muscle. Like, there's pictures of me. My arms were twigs, whatnot. I had good legs from cycling, but my upper body was tiny. So I found Hyrox in October 2021, and then I dedicated a whole year of just getting stronger. And then I did my first race in November 2022.
How did the first race go? Because your first time when you were on a bike, you said you did really badly. But this time you've given yourself a year to kind of build up and prepare for your first competition. So did it go any better than the bike race?
I'm not going to offend anyone who's doing their first Hyrox, but you go into your first one, I'm going to smash this. I'm going to absolutely boss this. I did awful for me, for my standards. I got a 1:13 with a 5-minute penalty because I did the farmer's carry before the row.
Which can I mean, I'm going to ask you a question here, giving you the benefit to lie if you want to. Are the stations not always numbered? Have they not always been in number order?
Numbered.
So you just thought, yeah, fuck that. I want to do farmer's carry first.
It was just like, I did it, and I was on the farmer's carry, and I was like, fuck, I've missed the rower. And there's a video of my friend filming me, like he's filming the rowing gate, and then he's like, oh, he's going to run into the rower now. And you'll see me run past the rowing gate, and he's like, he's not running the rower. So yeah, that was my first one. But I finished that, and I was like, wow, I love this. I'm so glad I found it. I'm just going to stick with this, because it's just all-round fitness. It's like strength and endurance.
So since then, have you just been locked in on Hyrox training and then improving from each time to each time?
Yeah, so after that, I did Glasgow in February 2023. Sorry, I got something in my throat. I did Glasgow in 2023, and I was running around there, and I tore my calf, like a very minimal one on the sled push. I was really ill in the week before, so it was probably just like lack of nutrients, lack of electrolytes, loads of different things. Did that, and I was like, right, this isn't good, is it? So I came back from that. I did Munich 6 weeks later. I kind of didn't really gain any fitness, or like I lost fitness and then gained it back to a point at where I was in London. So like I did a 1:11 in Munich, and I was like, you've actually got to try and like pull your finger out and actually do this properly. Like you've done 2.5 races now. Like you kind of know what you need to improve on. And then I did a London Olympia, the men's open there, and I did a 1:04. This was in 2023. And I was like, right, you're getting somewhere here. And then this season's kind of just been like, I've matured as an athlete more this season than I ever have in any other season of any other sport I've done.
So how many Hyrox races have you, well, we'll say started at this point?
Started.
It's quite a few.
I want to say 19.
Which, yeah, that's a lot of Hyrox racing.
I've done way too many this season. A lot of them I've double stacked or triple stacked.
So this is something I was going to come on to, because I think one of the things you've mentioned there in terms of athletic kind of maturity, it's definitely something that hits people at very, very different points in their career. If this is you having yours now, you lucky thing that you're having it when you're still like, you're 22, right? When are you 23? You're nearly 23 soon.
September.
Okay. So by next season, you'll be 23.
Yeah.
Now, having it that early on, going in as like an experienced athlete at 23 with some maturity, you're going to have some tactical understanding of how you would approach Hyrox. Now, to not only say that you've done 19 races, but again, something that I became pretty aware of is in the Olympia weekend just gone.
Yeah.
You did the men's open and you set a world record. You then did the men's pro.
Other way around.
Oh, other way around. Sorry. So you did men's pro first. Sorry.
Yeah, men's
that
pro.
was on the Saturday.
Saturday evening, yeah.
On Saturday evening, and then you decided to do the men's open on Sunday, which was like Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
In arguably a fatigued state, and then you set a world record. And then on the Monday, because it was a 3-day event, you also did the relay, and your team won that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to be able to not only carry the load of doing that, because I competed on the Sunday as well in the open. I did a men's doubles, so like I'm also not doing the full load in comparison to you on that singular day, let alone the rest of the event.
Yeah.
I still felt pretty wrecked after that. So you must be very, very efficient in terms of where you're applying your kind of effort in order to get the best sort of out of your times and stuff, because you are doing so much across that weekend. And so you're needing to recover, but you're also needing to do it in a way that is still giving you a good result. What I'd love to know, and I'm sure some people listening to this would love to know, are what are some sort of tactics or things that you have learned from your sort of many, many races that you would immediately apply if you could start again?
That's a good one. Sort of in-race tactics?
Yeah. Or... So for example, some of the things that I've seen on Instagram and that sort of thing is when you're doing like the wall balls section, if you imagine holding your arms above your head, just like, I don't know, for 2 minutes, your arms are actually going to get pretty tired just from holding them up. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you think you're going to try and do an unbroken set of wall balls that could be the full 100, which I'm aware that you've done, your arms are going to get tired if you just hold your arms up in the air, let alone if you're pushing a ball. So some people drop their arms a little bit and let the ball come down. That's a tactic that can give you maybe a split second of rest in your shoulders between each rep. That's something you can give a go. If it works for you, great. Are there any other things throughout the rest of the course or even on the wall balls as well that you think could benefit someone that's pretty new to it?
It's your race. Don't look at anyone else. So that's the main thing. Like, you're always going to have someone that sprints off at the start. And I've done way too many races now to know exactly if that person sprinted off at the start, I will see them in about 10 minutes time and they will not be going as fast. So run your own race. Don't just shoot off from the gun. Secondly is, and this is more of a mental one than anything, but whenever you stop just further than halfway. So on the sled push, each length, 12.5 meters, stop at 7 meters. Stop just before you go over halfway, because mentally it makes the second half so much easier. So that's the first thing, that you kind of stop on halfway. Sled pull, you don't really stop. Just pull, pull, pull. Burpees, it's always, if it's 2 lengths, if you're going to stop just over halfway. If you're not going to stop, just go on through. And then the wall balls, never stop on a 5 or a 10. Stop on a 6 or an 11 or a 12. Just because you get to 10 and people are like, right, it's 10, I'll switch off. And then they do an 11th and they're like, actually, I could do 5 more. And then they're like, oh, I'm on 16, I may as well go to 20. Oh, but I can't stop on a 20, I'll go to 21. Yeah, I can do 5 more. It's all very mental. Like, that's the biggest thing I've learned, is your body can do so much more than your head thinks it can do. And it's just, over time, you just get the mindset to actually do that, if that makes any sense at all.
I get you. I think utilizing a way to kind of trick yourself into doing more is something that will allow you to prove to yourself that your body can do a lot more than your mind thinks it can. But quite interesting. I'm gonna take some of those in as well, because having done doubles, I've done 2 races myself. I've done both of them doubles. When you're doing things like the sled push, you just do 1 length each. Yeah. And so you're not really pausing, but I'm aware that in order to save your legs to be able to do the rest of the race, it's quite a good idea to pause at halfway in each of those 12.5 meter lengths. Mm-hmm. But I'd never even thought about going just over halfway. And especially on wall balls, I'm always looking to do a changeover or have a rest every 10 or 5, because it's just kind of what makes sense in terms of counting. But it makes sense to kind of push it past and then, okay, I'll go to the next 5. I'll just do 1 more because I'm supposed to. And then you kind of just keep going. I think the other thing as well is everyone, when you're doing these events, probably has some sort of watch on. Is trying to track their time. You're doing so much maths that the maths can distract you from the pain of what you're doing. And I guess kind of throwing your brain off in terms of what it's got to count can often distract you a little bit from what you're actually doing again there. Yeah. So no, good tips. I like that. Now, in the interest of giving other people some more information, another thing that we do on this podcast is we have listener questions. So if you're not already following on the social media, anyone that's listening to this, head over to @mindsets_podcast on all forms of social media. Drop it a follow, more specifically the Instagram, because on stories, there is often the opportunity to interact. So if you like the idea of getting involved as to whether or not we should add something to the podcast, like the show and tell, that's where that'll be. But also the listener questions box. So what I do, put some information out about an upcoming guest. Sometimes I'll reveal who that is. In this instance with Charlie, I put some of your own videos up so people knew who you were. Not that they didn't already. And then they could ask some questions specifically for you. So we've actually got We've kind of got 3.5 questions here because there are 2 that tie together quite nicely.
Yep.
So the first question comes from George. And George wants some advice or guidance on changing of sport. So probably looking more into the transition from cycling to Hyrox. And that kind of ties in with a question from Jack, which was why Hyrox?
So whenever changing sport, or this is like anything in life, if you're changing over or want to get better at something, try and surround yourself or engage with people who are better than you. So when I first came across Hyrox, one of the first people I messaged, and I still occasionally message him now, is James Kelly. And he's run a 54-minute pro time now. And it's kind of like, pick the brains of people who are better than you and try and learn from them, because you learn so much more from those above you. So that's probably the biggest thing when transitioning sport, learn. Like, it's not all physical, you need to learn the mental aspects and what ticks boxes that make you faster. And then, why Hyrox? There's loads of reasons why Hyrox. The first one was like, I'll be good at this. That was the first thought I had. It's a sport that suits me down to the ground, just because it's just grit. It's just like, it's hard work. But then it's also such a young sport. And it's like, if the sport takes off in like 5-10 years time, and it's taking off at the moment in the UK especially, if I'm one of the pioneers at or one of the people at the start, I could make a career out of it. Not even necessarily as an athlete, but just as someone who knows a lot about the sport. And it's kind of at the point now where I've got, over the past few months, lots of traction and lots of engagement from people because they want to know more about it because they're getting into it. And obviously I've been in it for over 2 years now. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. It's such a young and new sport, and it's one that I could really make a career out of.
No, I think that's good. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, it being a young sport and with how quickly it's blowing up, if that trajectory continues, even if we look at things like CrossFit that came out in a similar style, like blew up, it's still a huge thing today. And you might say Hyrox is stealing the limelight a little bit at the moment. I mean, that's always going to happen, but I mean, CrossFit's still a huge thing for a year. I don't think Hyrox is going anywhere anytime soon. So if you can be a pioneer and, a big brain on how to do it best, then absolutely. Great. So the next question I have is from Amelia. And Amelia's question is, how did you balance your disordered eating and fueling for your sport at the time you're doing it? Which I guess is more prevalent with cycling.
That's a very good one. And it was it went from purely being anorexic to sort of, I can still control what I eat and stay a lean enough weight to succeed at a sport. But on that note as well, I do think I could have, I don't think, I know I would have been a much better cyclist, and I would have been a much better racer if I'd have fueled better, because I fueled my sport, but it wasn't like a necessarily healthy way of fueling. Like some rides I do 4 hours and I wouldn't eat on the whole ride. And it's like, if you want to be the best in a sport now, you have to consume carbohydrates, food, calories during the event. So for instance, in Hyrox now, very few people do it. No, very few people even have one, but I take 2 gels in a race. I have a gel after the sled push and a gel after the rower. And I've just found that there's literature both for and against it, but personal preference has helped me so much. So managing fueling with disordered eating, it's difficult. And unless you know what you're doing, you won't succeed. And I didn't really know what I was doing, hence why I didn't succeed in cycling.
Okay.
It's one of the compounding factors as to that.
Yeah, it's a huge thing directly related to performance. Just as a quick pointer on what you mentioned there about the gels, when I was also running with, doing the Olympia one in London recently, that was my first time taking a gel during a Hyrox, and I had it after the row, and I definitely got a second wind. And I don't know if it's because it was my second race, so I was managing things a little bit better generally. I think that is the case, but I definitely got a second wind after doing that. One question I have though is I also had a gel, so I did have two, but I had my first one just before the race started. Why do you go for one after the sled push?
So I have, if we're including the warm up, I have 3 gels.
Okay.
So, and like they range between 25 and 30 grams of carbs in each one, depending on the one I'm having. So I'd have, my warm up's always the same every time. It's 45 minutes, which is a really long time, but for me, that's just what I'm used to and it works for me. And so in the warm up, I'm just kind of spilling a secret here. I read a study once, got bored, read a study. Sound like an older man, not a 22-year-old. And it was about, if you do a 90-second hard effort, no, this was the course of the study, take a gel and then instantly do another 90-second hard effort. It helps with the actual like synthesis of the glucose, like whatever's in the gel, like maltodextrin, glucose, fructose, whatever. And then it spikes your blood sugar up to a really high level. And then I kind of just use the one after the sled pull and the one off the road just to maintain it at such a high level. And it's very unsustainable, but Hyrox is only a 1 hour race for me. So those 2 gels just keep it at as high a level as possible. Like obviously, you wouldn't want it that high when you're not exercising because that's not good. But when you're exercising, you want your blood sugars to be high just because it's fuel for the muscles. So it just works for me. And at the end of the day, it's whatever works for you. Like I don't drink during a Hyrox race because I can go the whole thing without drinking. But I know that some people have to drink every other station and that works for them. So that's what works.
There's an interesting fact here. I'm currently reading a book called How Bad Do You Want It? And like 5 pages in, I got slapped in the face with a fact and I've lost an excuse when I'm training. Studies have been done on people that are quote unquote dehydrated. And when I say quote unquote, what I mean is that they haven't gone days without water when they're doing their training. They've just not had access to water in the lead up to training. Mm-hmm. And what they found is that it's very, very common. People get or feel thirsty and then their performance declines. However, it's been scientifically proven that it's actually the thinking process of thinking I'm thirsty that actually then gives your brain or your body an excuse to taper off in terms of performance. Now, obviously that is a study that's done not on like a massively endurance race where it's like a marathon or anything like that, but even on like a short sprint of like 20 minutes, if you give it to someone who's not had a drink within half an hour before the workout, they're more likely to drop their performance more quickly than someone who has had access to liquid during or even before it. And what it's basically highlighting is that something like your hydration is something that even superior athletes don't argue with, because it's always seen as, oh, you should be hydrated, you should have all your electrolytes. Yeah. So as soon as you realize you're not hydrated or you don't have your enough electrolytes, that is one of the things that very quickly your body goes, oh, well, I should be careful with.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, it doesn't have as big an impact as you would expect it to. And I find it very interesting, therefore, that while you race, you don't go for it. Because my first race, it was very, very early on that we were set off. They hadn't put the water stations out in the warm-up area. Mm. And so I was going into this race with the driest mouth. And I was like, well, already I'm not in an ideal state.
Yeah.
So I was just throwing cups of water over me as I was getting through. And realistically, you're not able to get a good drink of water unless you want to stand still and waste your time racing. But I think in my most recent race, beyond the 4th station, which is burpees, I just didn't. Mm-hmm. I was just like, look, the floor's slippy over there. I don't want to go near there. That's one thing. But the second thing is I think I'm good. And by removing the the thought process of when and if you need it? Do you think that's something that, therefore, knowing that it's shut out is just something you don't have to consider as one less thing to worry about?
Yeah, it's just like, if you extrapolate things out, like everyone's always looking for 1%ers. Like people take all these different supplements, all these, like spend hundreds of pounds on like 1% gains in their shoes, stuff like that. And then they'll spend 45 seconds longer than they need to diverting to get a drink. And it's like 45 seconds for me in a 60-minute race, 45 seconds is what? 1.5%, 2%. And it's like, I'm not saying don't drink water during your race. If you need the water, drink it. But tiny things like that, like Dave Brailsford, the Team Sky and now Ineos like owner in cycling, he like swears by the 1%ers. And if you can compound 1%ers, you'll become the best athlete in the world. And that's all it is. It's just small things like that. Do you need, even if it's cutting it down from a water break every other station to one in the middle, that saves you 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds, whatever. Just some things like that.
Yeah.
Like, just pick apart. If you want to become the best, you have to pick apart every single aspect. And after Olympia, I sat down on my computer, I looked at all my results, and I picked apart every single thing that went not wrong, but that could have gone better. And that's how you become the best, essentially.
Yeah.
And I'm not there yet, but that's where I want to be, and that's the thought process you need to go through to get there.
Yeah, especially when you're at the top end. Something you've picked up on there is obviously the percentages. So I guess if we look at a race, it might take you 45 seconds to drink your water. There might be someone who's actually better at drinking water than you, so it only takes them 40 seconds if we're doing a comparable thing. But basically what I'm saying there is 40 seconds for someone else that, you know, manages to get through the circuit in a personal best time of an hour and a half is less of a concern than other things. But like you said, you're looking for any small advantage you can get. And if you can outline some things where, you know, you're not doing enough, in my case, sadly, the running isn't quick enough. So the running is clearly the thing I need to work on. And that is something that I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on over some slightly smaller things right now that are impacting my performance, until my running is at the level where actually now we need to start taking a look at other things. And so it's kind of taking that approach. But no, that's an interesting point. And what I don't want to do is move on to the next section without asking Lizzie's question. So Lizzie has come in with a pretty short question. What is BTND?
So BTND, better the next day. Like BTND is just the short name for it. So some of you may or may not know Jake Williamson, does Hyrox. Really good at it. And when we did the European Champs in Vienna, I was there on my own. I bumped into Jake in the, like, after the race, the recovery bit. And he won his age group in his race, but he wasn't happy with it. And he did look a bit pissed off when I went up to him. But I kind of just went up to him and I was like, oh, I've seen you on Instagram, whatnot, Charlie. And we got speaking, spent the whole like weekend with him and Richard Kirby, like Jake's coach and my friend and kind of mentor now. And then we got talking and whatnot, and Jake was like, oh, I've got my company BTND and I need a second person. Do you want to get involved? And this was in February this year. And then I was like, yeah, because I didn't have anything planned after uni. My boss at so I worked at the Wembley Arena, and he was like, this isn't for you full time. Like, I love having you here. You're like so useful and you're a great employee, but you don't want to, you're not meant to work in hospitality. And this was kind of the opportunity I needed to work with BTND. So answering your question, it's essentially a brand helping and aiming to get people who aren't necessarily have the opportunities to do sport into sport. So we've organised run clubs So we have run clubs set up in London, Birmingham, Nottingham, New York and Amsterdam. And then we want to expand them out all over the place. And the run club it's a charity. So we don't make any profits off of it. It's purely there to get people who aren't necessarily or don't necessarily have good access to sport into sport. And then we also have a gym space we're opening up and an app that we're launching, which are both going to be aimed at just getting people into sport and making sport fun. And the gym space is going to be Hyrox based, and we're going to do a lot of like Hyrox specific classes there, purely because it's what Jake and I are good at, and it'll help us improve ourselves as well. And then we've got the BTND Foundation as well, which aims at sort of giving sport to people who have not necessarily been given a fair opportunity into it. So, for instance, disabled athletes, LGBTQ plus athletes, and just anyone who's kind of been seen lesser of in the past, possibly, whether that be through religion, race, whatever. And it's kind of just providing a safe space for anyone and everyone to exercise and get into sport. So that's kind of BTND in short. It's just making things better.
Amazing. And I appreciate that, obviously, as you mentioned, this is early on this year that you got involved with it. So it's still in its early days, but it seems like things are moving pretty quickly, which is pretty exciting. So for anyone that's not following along with what's going on, don't worry. All the tags will be in the sort of description for the podcast, but also you'll be able to find it through the Mindset's Instagram page and obviously Charlie's page as well, or Jake's if you follow Jake Williamson's page as well. Amazing. So concluding the listener questions section, we're now going to go to yourself for a bit of wisdom. We've given some tips to other people, but at this point, I want some tips from you to you. So in this section, we do 3 pieces of advice. Typically, we might ask for 3 pieces of advice for a younger version of yourself. However, being 22, there's a long career ahead of you. So I like to split it. I like to say, could we have 2 pieces of advice for a younger version of yourself and 1 piece of advice for an older version of yourself?
Oof. So younger version of myself, embrace failure, which is a segment in my book that I'm writing. And it's kind of like there's another quote I've got in my book. I'm a massive lover of quotes and whatnot. And it's, if you always succeed, you'll never fail. And if you never fail, you'll never succeed. Failure is what makes success, not success. And that's probably the most pivotal thing I should have used from a younger age. Like, it's good to fail. And like, not even just in sport. Like, if there's like, for instance, if there's a girl that you like I've had plenty of girls that I've liked and whatnot, and I've been too afraid to talk to them. And I'm like, you've missed that opportunity. Like, if you never give it a go, you'll never know. Like, talk to people, get to know people, try new things, do all these different things when you're young, when it doesn't necessarily matter.
Because like you'll get old, you'll have a house, you'll have kids, and you won't be able to try these things and fail because failure will actually negatively result in something. So that's probably the main thing I'd give to my younger self.
And then on a very similar note to that, but I'd classify as something different, is do hard things. Like, challenge yourself, because you don't improve as a person in a comfort zone.
Plenty of friends, like especially at university, who
are happy just leaving uni, going into a 9-to-5, and just being comfortable. And that is completely fine if that's what you want to do. It's your life and whatnot. But I think you're very similar. If you want to be as successful in life as possible, you have to embrace discomfort and you have to do hard things,
because you'll never grow as an individual
if you don't do that. If that makes any sense.
It does make sense. I think, I mean, I'd encourage everyone to, if you're nervous about doing something particularly hard, have a crack at it. Worst comes to worst, you're in the same position you're in now. Like, you haven't done it, but at least you had a crack at it. And what you probably learned along the way is that actually the start of it wasn't as bad as you thought, or you learned something along the way. And I mean, I've done a training session with you. Actually, I should have mentioned that. For people listening to this, I've had the pleasure of training alongside Charlie. And I didn't even try. I wasn't trying to keep up. I was trying to stay in my own lane and do my own thing. But it's not easy to train alongside someone who has been competing as long as you have, when I haven't been. I haven't got the same experience. My body's not in the same shape. But being able to do that, as much as I didn't keep up, meant that I could kind of see different areas that I could improve myself. And I'm not gonna lie, I was actually quite nervous turning up, even though it was a gym that I'm used to training at, with a coach that I'm used to training with. Your presence there was like, okay, cool, this is going to be harder than usual. Not because the workout's any different, but because I, in my frame of mind, am going to be competitive to the degree of, I'm not expecting to beat you, I'm just expecting to hang as close as I can to you.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot that day, just from purely how you approach things, your pacing, everything like that. And in reality, I could have, first of all, I could have not invited you.
Yeah.
I could have just done it on my own. Or I could have just pulled out and just been like, oh, I'm just going to do this one on my own in my own time. But I committed to it. And as a result, you know, it kind of put new perspective in my brain on how to do things. And I will inevitably do more and more hard things that stack.
That kind of goes back to near the start of the podcast. And it's kind of, you're in a situation that I was when I first came into Hyrox, because I'm not like gospel and I'm not the like bearer of all knowledge, but it's kind of surround yourself with people who are better than you in the sport, and you'll improve and learn things. And it's kind of a cycle that just goes on from person to person. So yeah, that's kind of just throwback to the start of the episode, really.
For sure. Now, just to double check, is that 2 pieces of advice for a younger version of yourself there?
Yeah.
And what can we get for future Charlie?
The day you plant the seed is not the day you get to eat the fruit. So good things will never come immediately. It's kind of like signaling that if I want to get to where I want to be, it's not just you're there. You have to put things in place now to give you success in the future. So I've got plenty of things that I'm working on now and putting in place that will allow me in 5-10 years time to live life freely almost. But then as an athlete as well, you kind of have to periodize everything looking towards the future. So for instance, this whole season, I've not been in peak shape going into any race because I've based the whole season on Nice in 2 weeks' time. So all my training has been periodized, getting different elements better for that race. And that's kind of the approach you need to take. So the day you plant the seed is not necessarily the day you get to eat the fruit.
Excellent. Now, that kind of brings me into a quick question. You, throughout this podcast, have dropped some great quotes. And this is something that when we first met, literally a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned a quote from someone else that had previously been on the podcast, and you immediately said, I'm going to make a note of that and I'm going to add that to my list of quotes.
Yep.
I think it's really cool that you have a list of quotes that resonate with you. Mm-hmm. What's the thinking behind that? And have you got any others that you think the listeners may benefit from? I know that you do have the list.
I'm not going to get my phone out on the podcast, but I'm going to keep my phone just off of camera shot here. So I've kind of picked out 6 here.
Okay.
I've got about 200, a list of 200 from all different people that are filtered down, and some will go in my book because I'm writing a book about all these quotes. Very long-winded, but when it gets published, you'll enjoy it. So top 1, you learn more from failure than you ever will from success.
Yeah, similar to what you were going with your own advice. Cool.
And this is one I probably should have included in those 3 questions. The choice of inaction is still a choice of action. So choosing to be inactive is still a choice of action, and that's in any aspect of life. If you choose not to pursue that goal, you've actively chosen to, I'm trying to word that better. The choice of inaction
It's still a choice of action. And then
use difficult moments as catalysts to contextualize how you feel. If something goes wrong, like you're stuck in traffic at a red light, are you actually angry? And use a moment where you've been truly angry to kind of be like, actually, I'm not angry. It just is life. And then strong minds suffer without complaining, while weak minds complain without suffering. And that's not necessarily calling people weak, but it's kind of saying, is a situation you're in now really the end of the world? And it's kind of like,
we all have the ability to
contextualize that actually this isn't bad. Everything could be so much worse. And use that to kind of sort of callous the mindset, and like everything's kind of harken back to do hard things and embrace failure. Like all of that, it's kind of just make sure that you challenge yourself and appreciate that. As well, in my case, I live in the UK, I have a house over my head, I've got my dream job, I've got a body that, apart from my left knee occasionally, works like perfectly, and just appreciate that. So it's kind of just appreciate that for most of us, we're in a situation that we have control, not a situation that controls us.
Cool. I think they're very, very good quotes, and I think I'm looking forward to reading the book and finding even more of them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us closer towards the end of the podcast, but we do have one more question, which actually comes from the previous guest, Cairo. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I do recommend you go back to it. It's an interesting tale of someone who also had a similar journey with football, injury, changed their path, went towards bodybuilding, ended up getting interested in the use of performance-enhancing drugs. They're very open about it. It's an interesting discussion. I recommend you listen to it. Now, Cairo's question to you is there a certain amount of money that could take you away from your current goals? And if so, how much and why?
Well, on my 20th birthday, 13th of September 2021,
I wrote a list of 10 goals I want to achieve in 10 years by the age of 30. Now, one of those goals
was to have all my close family financially secure. So in essence, that kind of...
It can't technically
happen. But no, I wouldn't accept... To do what I want to do, I wouldn't accept any money.
Because then the whole point for me in a goal is...
It's something you pursue. Like, because you don't get happiness from money. You can be happy spending your money, but it's not really about the pursuit of happiness,
money, but the happiness of pursuit.
You get enjoyment from working towards your goals, not necessarily the outcome of the goal. For me, anyway. So no, I wouldn't accept any money, because the whole point is it's going to be difficult to achieve certain things that you want to achieve. And that's the whole point. Like,
don't sound morbid. We're all going to die. And when
you die, it doesn't really matter how much money you have in your bank account. Let's face it. So no, I wouldn't accept any form of money for the goals that I have, because the goals are what make life worth living.
I like that. I think that's a very honest answer. I think it's very difficult. Most people will be like, oh no, like I wouldn't, because my goals are much more important. But I think what you're highlighting there is it's the person you become and the life that you live along the way to achieving those goals. You can try and cut a corner by being given a financial sum, but the value of the money doesn't equate to the value of the life that it's taken away, if that makes sense.
It's like, I don't know, I'll cut this story down, but have you ever heard of the Mexican fisherman story?
Tell us all the Mexican
fisherman story. So I'll cut it down as quickly as possible. There's a really long version, but essentially there's a Mexican fisherman, goes out, fishes in the morning, catches enough fish to feed his family, has a siesta, goes around the campfire in the evening with his family, sings a few songs, have a couple drinks, wakes up in the morning, catches fish.
Does it? American businessman comes up to him.
You do know if you spent a bit longer catching more fish, you would make more money because you could sell them, and then with that money you could get a bigger boat, and you could then employ more people to catch fish, and you could make a factory, and you could sell all these fish everywhere, and you could become the biggest fish tycoon in Mexico. And then you'd be able to happily retire and just relax. And then the Mexican fisherman turns around to him and is like, but why would I want to do that? Because I'm exactly where I am now as I would be then. I fish for fun and I relax with my family. And if I made all the money in the world, I would still fish for fun and relax with my family.
So that story
makes money. It makes money just an object. Money, people, obviously in modern society, money is important, but people pursue money too much people pursue money to a point where it makes them miserable. And it's like, you just need enough money to live a happy life. That's the Mexican fisherman story, essentially.
Well, there we go. So before we round off, I need your question for the next guest. And same as Cairo, I'm not going to give anyone here any information about who the next guest is. So what would you like to ask them?
I wrote it down because I thought of it and I was like, this is a perfect question.
Came prepared. I like it.
So,
if you could sit down for dinner with one person, who would it be?
Dead or alive? Open to either?
Open to either, but who would it be? Who could you gain, and this isn't for like publicity, oh, I've just had dinner with...
But just in terms of a knowledge.
Just like a celebrity, but just who could give you the knowledge and tools you need in your life? Who could you sit down with at dinner and be like, wow, this person is truly like, not like, they just have so much knowledge, if that makes any sense. I've probably said if that makes any sense.
No, I think that's a good question. I typically sometimes have a go at answering these questions as they come in myself. My mind went incredibly blank then, and I don't want to say someone I don't mean. So what I'll do is I'll have a think before the next episode comes out in a week's time, and I will also try and answer that question as well. But for you guys then, that means you've got to tune into the next week's episode, find out my answer, find out the next guest's answer. Now, before we finalise and we say goodbye to everyone who's been listening today, where can all of the lovely listeners find you?
So I have LinkedIn and whatnot, but my main form is Instagram. So it's at Charlie_EFMB. The EFMB is my initials. Ewan Fraser MacGregor Botterill. Can you tell I'm Scottish? You can't tell by my voice though. So that's probably the best place to find me. I do a reel a day, mainly based on like Hyrox and running and how you can improve your performance, and that's it really. And I'm happy to answer any questions, as deep and meaningful or as shallow as you want, in my DMs. So just slide into my DMs, drop me a question, and yeah, that's where you can find me.
Amazing. So with that, Charlie, thank you very much for being an excellent guest today. If you guys have enjoyed this podcast, please do give it a share. Let other people in your network learn the lessons, especially if you've got a doubles partner. They probably need to learn a few things from Hyrox. Or if you know anyone that could benefit from some of the advice that Charlie's given based on his personal struggles through his sporting career. Like I said, give it a share, give it a like, any comments or questions, feel free to shoot out our way. Again, the social media for the podcast is at mindsets_podcast. Likewise, when you're there, you can find who I am and where I am as well. But that ties us up at the end of this episode. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.